So I'm Kelsey Gilmore Futerall. I know I've seen some of y'all on the recordings beforehand, so we're super glad that you're here for the last and live version of Take Charge to Make Change, how advocacy can improve your shelter operations and your life saving. I'm a legislative attorney here at Best Friends Animal Society. I'm in the Charleston, South Carolina area, and I'm going to have my fellow panelists introduce themselves. So Eric, let's start with you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Swafford. I'm the Senior Manager of Campaign Strategy here at Best Friends. I live in Dayton, Tennessee, which is a small town just outside of Chattanooga.
Caitlin?
Hey, everybody. I'm Caitlin Simmons. I'm the Senior Manager of Grassroots Advocacy, and currently I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia.
And Kathleen?
Hi, I am Kathleen Murphy, and I'm with Best Friends as a legislative policy analyst, but my other role is as an elected official here in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm on our city council.
Fantastic. And yes, feel free to say where you're from if you like in the question and answer. I think the chat is not functioning for y'all. So put your questions in the Q&A section and we will either answer them in chat or live as they come up. But let's jump in because I know y'all are all busy caring for animals. This year, as we have talked about offline, has been very different from the past 2 years, as they all seem to be. So let's talk about why talking about policy matters. I know it takes people away from the actual care of the animals that can feel like a priority. So I'd love for each of y'all to just give us an idea of why we need advocates talking about policy and why decision makers should care about your policies.
Well, I'll jump in and go first. I'm not bashful. With over 70% of the shelters in this country being either government shelters or shelters operating with a government contract, it's policymakers, elected and appointed officials, government officials, that oftentimes control the policies that actually become barriers to life saving. So the fastest way to remove those policy barriers through the people that put them in place.
And I can build on that a little bit. At the end of the day, we all know we can't save animals without people. So we know that we need people, but people have a really strong impact in elected officials because advocates essentially provide public opinion. Elected officials want to be reelected. So we need the community that elects them. They have that power. The other additional reason that we really need our community and we need our advocates is they can be kind of a bridge and a protector from small interest groups. So when we're arguing policy and we're trying to advocate for shelters and we're trying to advocate for resources, sometimes if you're an elected official who has so many things coming at you, it's very easy to say, well, this is a really small interest. There's just like a couple very loud groups, but it's fine. It's not our community at large. So getting your advocates together, getting your community together and showing that this is in fact an issue that impacts community members, that people care about, that matters, is critical to your work. They can also amplify your message and be that voice when you are putting out fires and you are dealing with the day-to-day issues impacting animals in your community can have your back and they can elevate the issues that you need so that you have that time to put out those fires and deal with the emergencies every day.
So Kathleen, I'm going to ask you to put on your elected official hat and to explain from that seat why a policy matters to you as an elected official. What's that threshold for you?
A policy often will kind of rise to the top and become a priority for me if I'm hearing about it. I mean, so cliche, if I'm hearing about it from my community. If it's a one-off kind of situation of something that's not a trend, like if it's just kind of a fluke accident, then, I might choose that it's not the best idea to kind of legislate around that or problem solve around that. But if it's something that is happening over and over again, or happening in different parts of the city and we can fix it, then that becomes a priority. So it is hearing from multiple people, but not necessarily about one incident. You need to demonstrate that this is a problem to the community that's affecting more than just an isolated incident.
That's a really helpful explanation. And so we know that a lot of our network partners have folks that are engaged in direct care of the animals, right? Maybe in fundraising and dog walking and helping to clean out cat cages, that are really engaged in the direct care of those animals, because who doesn't want to come in and cuddle on a kitten? How do network partners help the supporters understand the importance of advocacy and prioritizing these policy asks and this work that they've learned about these last few months?
I think for me, and I can start here, there's so much. I mean, I could talk about this forever, but I won't. So don't panic. But at the end of the day, it's building that messaging arc and building that vision for your advocates in your community. So it's about explaining to them where you're at and where you're going, and what every call to action, how that it fits in along the way. So with your advocates, the amount of work and time that it takes, let's say, to foster an animal. I love fostering. It's one of the most meaningful things I've personally done, but there's limited bandwidth to do it, right? Like you can only foster so many animals, and when you do, it's very time consuming. So the beautiful thing about advocacy is if they have time, they can provide that, and you can do so much with more. But if they have 5 minutes, they can have a huge impact in 5 minutes. So it's helping your volunteers and your community understand that this ask that you're making of them can be small and have a big impact. And you have to show them, like, this is the impact that we're working to create. And it's keeping them engaged so that they feel like, one, they're a vital part of it. Two, they understand what they're working towards, because sometimes that's the disconnect, right? Is you have this kind of squishy policy thing, but what does that mean in terms of like the cats and dogs in the shelter? Like, how is that going to impact them? How is it going to impact their neighbor or their grandma or their best friend? So building that out. And then the absolute most critical piece to me that I think we forget is sharing our wins. And it doesn't have to be the big win. It can be a small win along the way. So for example, if you ask people to call, we'll say city council, to pass whatever XYZ ordinance. And one of the city council members reaches out to you and says, oh my gosh, your constituents are blowing up my phone. That's a win. That means that they have made noise. So like, you haven't passed XYZ ordinance yet, but your voice is being heard and you're elevating the issue. So share each step and every win so that they get excited by this work.
That's great, Caitlin. Along that line, remember that your community can't help you. Your advocates can't help you if they don't know what's going on, if they don't know what's needed, if they don't know that there's a problem. You know, I think oftentimes, and everyone has had this thrown at them. You ask someone what's wrong. Well, if you don't know, I'm not going to tell you. Everybody has either said that or had that said to them. Well, we don't need to be that way with our advocates. We need to be transparent. We need to let them know what's going on. We need to let them know when we have those wins. We need to let them know when we're struggling and when we need help. You know, our advocates, our communities want to engage. They want to help. They want to partner for the betterment of your shelter and for the betterment of the animals, but they can't if we don't tell them. So be transparent. Let them know when there's an issue. Let them know when, you know, our fosters are down. We really need people to foster. We really need help with XYZ. It's okay to say when you need help and be transparent and even be a little bit vulnerable. And it's amazing the way advocates will step up and rise to the occasion and lend that helping hand that we need.
I agree. You've got to also, you know, while you're keeping your advocates informed on the process, also keep your elected officials informed as well. So like if they're like, whoa, we have gotten 50 emails over the last 3 days from y'all, tell them that's great. Here's the next step. That's wonderful. Thank you for letting us know that. We're going to continue to build, or we're going to move this direction or that direction, because a lot of times your elected officials will start to feel like they are part of your movement. I mean, you want that, right? You want them to feel like they're along for the journey too. They're part of, you know, solving the problem. And so keeping them on that kind of messaging arc that you talked about, Caitlin, and keeping them involved gives them something to look forward to and helps prevent it from falling off their list of priorities if there is a gap in time or something else pops up very urgently on their agenda. So I agree. You gotta keep your advocates totally in the loop, but keep your electeds as well.
And so we've got a question in the chat that I think is a really great question about which decision makers we're targeting, or which folks we're talking to when we're asking for policy change. And this really dovetails into something I want to give a little sneak peek to, that we've got a due diligence playbook that's going to be live and ready to pick up at National Conference. So if you're there, absolutely pick up a copy. When you're doing due diligence in your community and when you're starting to formulate these goals and asks, that's when you will identify the appropriate decision makers to direct your asks to. So if you've got a relationship with the governor, that's fabulous. That may not necessarily help change whether you can implement a community CAP program at a local level, or whether you can increase your foster care program to improve lifesaving or to deal with different medical issues. So it's really getting down to the issue that you're trying to solve and how you need those advocates to make that ask. And I'm really excited that you guys get a little sneak peek of information that a due diligence playbook is coming out. The other thing I think
I'm sorry. I was going to say, I'll give an example there. So like, I'm a local elected official. I represent Nashville city level, right? Local level. And I get maybe, once a year an email about the postal service. And I know sometimes that can seem like it's local, right? Because it's like right outside your door. You usually know your postal, worker, but that's a federal, department. And so oftentimes I have a contact with the congressman's office. And so I'll give that to the constituent. But typically I don't have that contact with the postal service necessarily. But then also in reverse, people will contact your higher ups, the state representatives, when trash isn't getting picked up, and they'll call me, right? So it's a little bit of a two-way street, but keep in mind, if you can do that due diligence and figure out who is going to help you get your problem solved or answer your question the fastest, then you might not have that delay in figuring it out, and you'll be able to see those results faster.
So this next question was a really great question that came in, and they're asking about the key skills necessary for an advocate. I think there are a couple different ways that we could take this question. So Caitlin, I'd love it if you could talk about it from a supporter or a grassroots perspective. And then Eric or Kathleen, if you can talk it from the network partners perspective, where the folks that are on this call are also advocates because they're advocating for their policies and positions. So maybe a couple different lines of answers for this question.
I can start because I think in general, there's some kind of building blocks that you can use in relationships everywhere that are really important for advocates to keep in mind. And I say it's really important for advocates to keep in mind, because when we're an advocate, we expect people to treat us this way. We expect people to assume good intent. We expect people to bring us into the loop, but we also sometimes are advocating for things we're really passionate about and really invested in and really care about. And so when you kind of hit a wall, it's easy to forget that we need to be treating everybody around us that we're advocating with, even if we're really frustrated with them, even if they're not doing what we want, or we're opposed to their stance potentially, or even them. Sometimes when you're advocating for things, you have to advocate to people that you do not necessarily come with respect for. And you just have to remember that they are still a human being. And that at the end of the day, you need to approach them with compassion and authenticity and respect. And communication is the number one thing. So you have got to communicate out the way that you would want people to communicate to you. And you've got to communicate with them in a way that they will understand. So as an advocate, if it's something we're really passionate about, just assume that you know more about that than most of the people you're going to interact with. Our network partners and rescues and shelters and advocates are probably the most knowledgeable about these animal welfare issues. So just know that you're kind of the expert. And so you have to communicate out in a way that resonates with whoever you're talking to. So spend time getting to know them as a person, do your research. You can do a lot of research and think, how will this message connect with them? As an organization, our number one thing is thinking about how our messaging is going to connect with our advocates. As an advocate, we need to use that same skill and think about how is our message going to connect or resonate with those that we are trying to move and trying to sway and try to engage with.
That's great. I want to pull 2 nuggets out of that before we move on. We've got one in the chat that says, don't use jargon. Absolutely. Use consistent messaging and use words that people will understand or that you can define for them. And all the acronyms, we're all guilty of it. Out with TNVR, SNR, RTO, all the jargon. Use real words as much as you can and words that you can understand. And then Caitlin, what I really heard you say is, even if we don't agree on everything, find something that you do agree on and move forward with that when you're looking at your advocates. So I kind of wanted to distill those. Eric, can you talk a little bit about maybe how an advocate might have a negative effect on an organization when they're out and doing this work? Caitlin alluded to it a little bit, but I think this is an even more salient point, and we've seen it. It's a real thing, right? Like, you open the floodgates to the volunteers, and a lot of times we had elected officials who are a little hesitant to take on animal issues because it comes at them from both sides. So if you can share, maybe we know that they can have a negative effect. How might the network partners mitigate that?
Well, first, communicate. And I know I said that 3 times. I could say it 50 and it wouldn't be enough. Communicate to your advocates to assume positive intent, to be nice, to understand that elected officials have lots on their plates, and to give them a little bit of grace when talking to them. At the same time, communicate to the elected officials, hey, this is an issue that your constituents care about. They care about this deeply. It matters to them. If an elected official knows that something is really emotional, they'll offer that same grace to their constituent because they understand sometimes issues are personal. And everybody that's talked to me very much knows that I say all the time, politics is not personal, it's business. It's not personal. But sometimes the issues are personal to us. You know, there are issues that are personal to me. And if as a network partner, as a shelter, as a rescue, if you're communicating to the elected official, this is a real issue, then when they start hearing from those constituents, even those that might get a little hostile, might get a little off message maybe, they'll be a little more understanding. But they have to know it's coming. You know, no one likes to get blindsided. I don't care what we're doing. Nobody likes to get blindsided. We don't like to get blindsided in our home. We don't like to get blindsided by our friends. We don't like to get blindsided at work. Elected officials are no different. You know, it's been many years and 10 lifetimes ago, but I served in that capacity as an elected official. And the worst thing in the world was people, you know, coming at you and you know, being mad and angry when you didn't know there was an issue. And it does happen. And, you know, we all like to think, okay, we understand, but we're also all human. And what we never want is that elected official to go, okay, I'm not listening to this. And, you know, Kelsey, you and I have done some work in the state to the north of you and to the east of me with a senator over there that has made the statement he will not hear an animal bill. And it goes back now nearly 10 years because people just blasted him over his stance on an issue, and they made it personal. They took his stance on an issue and made it personal. Well, now he took it personal. And we're still battling 10 years later to get some help for the animals. So, you know, communicate to those officials, communicate to the advocates, and remind them, look, they've got a lot on their plates. stay on message, stay on point, be courteous, be respectful, be nice. You know, we don't have to respect an individual, but we should respect the office that they hold. And, you know, we should offer them the same respect that we ask them to offer us in return. And
Exactly.
again, it starts with just communication.
As we all go,
Yeah.
I've said that before. I go, you don't have to like me. You don't have to, I mean, but you have to respect the office that I hold and the constituents that voted me into this office. Because clearly a majority of our neighbors voted for me, and by disrespecting me is disrespecting them. Now, of course, there's some caveats there, right? Like, you know, but also I want to kind of flip that on, like, how can you fix it? So if you have someone go rogue, or someone going on your behalf or speaking on behalf of your organization or your shelter, and they were not authorized to, don't necessarily go in guns a-blazing. But again, we're all human, and go in and say, because maybe it was your messaging that was wrong too, right? Maybe it was the advocate that was wrong, and just go to the elected official, apologize, set the record straight. Now, sometimes maybe you weren't in the wrong, maybe your advocate wasn't in the wrong, but you still have to acknowledge that there was a communication disconnect and say, we want to move past this, because it's not always about the current vote or the current policy or the current budget on the chopping block. It's about continuing that relationship for when you need them again. Let me say that one more time. It's not necessarily about right now that you're apologizing for or trying to mend a relationship. It's about what is coming next, because it's that long term. Like Eric said, an example of 10 years, right? You don't want to get on somebody's bad side for that long. And so sometimes you just have to, you know, deep breath, go in and set it right, and say, what can we do to make this right? And at the time they may say nothing. I hate you. I never want to hear from you again. But don't let it go at that. Try again, give them time to cool off. And I mean, I think that goes for elected officials, department heads, people that work in departments, so on and so forth, right? Isn't that, I mean, that's just, I sometimes say, I mean, it's the skills you learned in kindergarten. You got to use them here too.
Yeah, I think that piece of accountability is so key too, because I think one of the things we need to remember as an industry, we've been guilty of looking at our advocates in two ways, right? We kind of look at our relationships, either where we're going to be best friends with people and we're going to work together in a partnership, or it's like fire and brimstone time, right? And we need to engage our advocate core. And so in some ways, in terms of like accountability, we have semi-built into our advocate base that when it's time to activate, it's because there's a problem. And when there's a problem, it's time to get upset. And I think we need to remember that you can be nice and you can be bold, and you can be nice and you can still create real change. You know, you don't have to go negative. And so I think pulling from those things that you guys said, Eric, when you said be nice, you can have strong messaging and still approach it from a place of just being kind, with that strong messaging.
Yeah, some of my favorite guiding principles at Best Friends is to be kind. And if we lead with kindness, that can certainly get us a long way. I want to wrap within the half hour. So I want to get to two more questions. I think, Caitlin, you may be the first person to start with this. One that came in: how can we expand our definition of community when we talk about advocacy? So many times we're accessing the same people. It's come into vernacular now, the echo chamber, essentially talking to people that relay the same message back to us. So how do we find a bigger picture of community when looking at increasing our advocacy strategies?
Definitely. I think at the end of the day, community really is everything. So we need to remember that community truly means everyone and everything. We like to think of, you know, animal welfare, it is a big movement, but it's also very small. And everybody knows everybody. The other thing to kind of keep in mind is that animal welfare people actually don't need convincing to join the movement, right? They've already raised their hand and said, I'm here for this. How can I help? A huge, huge base of people exist out there that I call them animal neutral, but if we're being honest, they're not actually animal neutral. So many people own pets, right? They love their pets. or they know somebody who owns a pet and they love that somebody. So many people are positively inclined towards animal. They may just be animal neutral in terms of where they choose to put their time and their energy, because it's not maybe their, their heart passion yet. But those are the people that we need to prioritize to take actions. And those are the people that advocacy is a wonderful entry place, because you're not asking them to give up their home or huge chunks of their time. You're asking them to take 5 minutes to engage in an issue that impacts somebody they know, their grandma, their neighbor, their cousin, their kid, somebody. And so it's a really good way to find those, and ultimately reaching everybody is what's going to help break that cycle. And it's going to bring new blood into our movement. It's also just, and I feel like Eric's probably going to talk about this, so I won't go too into depth, but you never know who you're talking to. So if you know your animal welfare people, you know who you're talking to. If you're reaching out to animal neutral people that you haven't engaged with yet, you never know who they are and who they know, and what is going to be that magic lever that pushes your effort forward.
I'll say, when we want to expand our community, start with your friends and neighbors. I think of the street that I live on in Dayton, America, as we call it. And literally everyone on our street has a dog or a cat, or dogs and cats in their home. Every one of us do. So, obviously my neighbors, my friends, they care about animals. They're not animal advocates, not all of them. I can tell you there's nobody on our street that's not taken some action in the last year to benefit animals and to benefit animals in shelters, because I just ask them to. I just mention it to them that it's important. Start with your friends and neighbors and say, hey, could you do this for me? I'm really needing about 10 people to make a phone call to this city council member, or to the mayor, or to the city manager. Could you do that? Or could you please share this on Facebook? Trust me, they will. So it's easy to grow that community and take people that love animals and also love and care about you, and will do something good for you. And that community just starts growing and growing and growing. And Caitlin, you're right. You knew I was going to say something. Everybody knows somebody. Everybody knows someone that can help. We may not realize that we do. We may have no idea who our neighbor went to college with, who their sister-in-law grew up playing softball with, whose child is on the same baseball team or soccer team or football team, or whose volunteer coach is next door neighbors with whom. So, just,
which I know are all exactly personal examples that you've had, Eric. So I appreciate you.
They kind of are. They kind of are. I literally was running through some in my head. You're exactly right.
Yeah.
But everybody knows someone. But again, it's the same as talking to your community all the time. No one knows to help you if they don't know there's an issue. No one knows, if you need something, if they can help you, if you don't just communicate with them. So, start with your friends, your family, your neighbors, and ask them. Everybody just reach one person. And it's amazing how your community will grow. And it's amazing how the response that they will give to you.
All right. I know, Kathleen, that you would probably have more to add to that. I want to get to a very important question.
I knew you were gonna cut me off. So go ahead. Next question.
Yeah. Well, it's about the money, right? So
all about the money.
That when y'all have finished this and you watched both sessions of the webinars, which should have, you're here or else you wouldn't have seen those other two sessions. But those are on our website, network.bestfriends.org/education. You should be able to find them from there, I'm thinking. you get a chance to fill out a grant application for one of 5 grants for $1,000. So Kathleen, you want to kick us off on how a network partner might spend $1,000 grant towards advocacy to create life-changing in their community?
Well, I don't want to take the wind out of other people's sails,
off.
because of course the ones we discussed earlier immediately come to mind. But no, I think that, maybe you need a way to communicate with your advocates, and that means upgrading your email system. Maybe you're using like a listserv and somebody's copying and pasting 50 emails over a time, right? Remember those days? Or maybe you're in those days now. So maybe it's using that to figure out a way to either communicate to your advocates better, or using some software where they can communicate to their legislators once you tap those advocates. So it could be just upgrading your communication systems.
Who else has ideas on how to spend $1,000 for advocacy? Caitlin?
I think Kathleen's digital tools, and I'll second it because what you can do with digital means with just a tiny amount of money, you can get so much bang for your buck. So even things like taking your ask and your call to action, what you're trying to reach out into the community with, and putting a little bit of money behind it in terms of like social advertising, you can reach whole communities that you have never talked to, never touched, never communicated with, by pushing things out digitally and just putting a little bit of money behind it. And so that's something to kind of consider too. If you're at a point where you feel you've really reached your maximum in terms of your current community and you're trying to find new communities and new people, I would strongly recommend that you look into different ways to utilize social media, put a little bit of money behind it, and find new areas, because that's also the gift that keeps on giving. So if you reach one person in that community, you've also expanded yourself to that entire social network.
Eric, can I pitch you a little different question, since Kathleen and Caitlin both talked about grassroots?
Sure.
As a network partner, director, CEO, how would you spend that money for your shelter to improve advocacy? Not to get more grassroots, but to directly advocate to decision makers.
Well, because my next stop this afternoon is FedEx, I've got to pick up some printing. As you all know, I'm in Arkansas today for a conference that starts tomorrow, and I've got to pick up some printed materials. And those things aren't free, but sometimes to communicate our messaging, to raise awareness on a variety of things, to let people know our position on an issue, we need those leave behinds. We need those flyers, those fact sheets, sometimes brochures. So that's a great thing to do, especially if you're meeting with elected officials. It's nice to have a leave behind that you can hand them. It's nice to give them an actual real printed fact sheet. And, that comes to top of mind, because literally that's my next stop for the day.
Gosh, and what's better to put on fact sheet than a data? And who's got webinars about data? These guys. The network partner team, starting on Tuesday, is going to have some fabulous, they're going to launch a fabulous webinar series on data. There's more information on that. Whitney's been dropping some links into the chat. She's got part 1 of the webinar series there, part 2 of the webinar series there, and she's got your grant application. If you're watching these recorded, these links should all be in the email that you have. The grant deadline is June 30th for your application. So put that in red on your calendars. Again, there's 5 grants, each of $1,000 that we're going to be giving out. Hopefully 4, it's a very, very brief application. Don't be like, oh, application, I don't have time for that. Seriously, click on the link, fill it out. And also look to sign up for more webinars on data. If you have questions about advocacy, you feel stuck, you're not quite sure what to do, you can always hit up the Best Friends Network at bfnetwork@bestfriends.org. bfnetwork@bestfriends.org. It's going to be in the chat as well. And we'd be happy to connect with you to help you work through any advocacy or policy asks or questions you have. If there are no final thoughts, I'll look around the room one time, see if anybody has any last minute knowledge to drop. All right. Well, we appreciate y'all being part of the Best Friends Network as we work to save them all for 2025, and appreciate you being here today.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.